started. We'll be live here momentarily. Well, good morning, everyone, or good afternoon for those of you in Europe. Thank you so much for staying with us. I hope you enjoyed that videotaped keynote presentation from Lars Rager, who is the Executive Vice President and Chief Technology Officer of NXP. Lars could not be with us for Q&A, but we do have next best thing. We have Peter Esser, who is the Head of Government Affairs for NXP. So especially if those of you in the public sector, find your hardest questions, put those in the Q&A box. We will be able to read those as they come in. And we have a few minutes here for questions, so go ahead and enter those. Now, I'm going to start off. Peter, I know you do a lot of work on Capitol Hill, a lot of work with state DOTs. Tell me sort of what's a day in the life of Peter Esser like? You mentioned that you're doing some work in Arizona this week.
Yes, in fact, today is the grand opening of our new gallium nitride facility. We're very pleased to announce that we've invested in excess of $100 million in bringing an older facility up to production of a new technology that is exciting in and of itself alone, but more importantly, it helps to usher in kind of the broader unfolding, if you will, of a 5G future. So very excited for that. And for anyone who'd care to join, if you just take a quick look on the web, NXP Echo GaN Fab, Chandler, Arizona, you should be able to register for the virtual event. It contains a live stream component commencing at 11 a.m. Eastern time. Happy to have everyone there.
Well, so when you're talking to elected officials about connected vehicles, what's the number one question you get? What are people asking you? What do they care about when they're thinking about doing connected vehicle projects in their state or city?
I think there's still, apart from folks who are at the level of a lot of our participants, from a policy standpoint, the higher up the food chain you go, there's a general sense of what vehicle connectivity meets and means and connotes, but there are fundamental understandings as to the current limitations on the technology, which are not in and of the technology itself, but coming from the policy landscape that we're confronted with. And what I mean by that is constraints placed upon us, for example, by lack of or the threat to the available spectrum. It's things of that nature. Everybody wants to see a shiny, bright future with greater safety, efficiency, and user friendliness, but there is a bit of a trade-off there, and the trade-off is giving the industry collectively everything that we need to work with to bring that safety to bear. And right now, I'm sure a lot of you out in the audience are quite well aware of what's playing out in Washington. The FCC is looking at potential reallocation of spectrum. That would mean that the 75 megahertz set aside in 5.9 are theoretically going to be subject to partitioning, such that only 30 megahertz would be left, which is at best going to leave us with severely limited use cases. So
I think it's really interesting because there's oftentimes it's talked about as a debate between cellular V2X and DSRC, but it's really not that. It's about having usable spectrum regardless of the underlying radio technology. Isn't that right?
Yeah, I'm trying to be technology agnostic here. In Lars's presentation, he gave a great overview of the capabilities of V2X. And as currently embodied in DSRC, which has already been deployed, we're seeing it come to scale slowly, but we would love to have that regulatory certainty. Knowing that we had the full 75 megahertz to work with, Jason, would definitely allow the OEMs to go forward with deployment plans in the near term.
Does that come up with, in your conversations with state and local officials when they're considering whether to invest in a connected vehicle project or not? That regulatory uncertainty, is that hampering deployment? Would you say
it does? Because licenses for additional radios have been languishing over at the FCC, and there have been hundreds of millions invested in the infrastructure build out. Already, all of that stands to essentially fall by the wayside if we are on this inexorable march towards reallocation. It's a tragedy, so we hope we can reverse it. I've spoken to government stakeholders till I'm blue in the face, but I think one thing that we really need to do is carry that message forward to the general public as well, so that the average auto buyer who is also a driver, who at some point or many points in his or her daily life also is a vulnerable road user, when they're a pedestrian or a cyclist or a motorcyclist, that they understand what's at stake.
Well,
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think what's interesting is, what's at stake is saving lives. I think Lars's comments about the World Health Organization's figures, I think 1.35 million fatalities on the roads worldwide each year. That's a preventable tragedy.
They're preventable tragedies. And in my lifetime, I've been involved in 2 serious motor vehicle accidents, not of my own fault, which were entirely preventable. It was distracted driving. Those are the kind of things. I mean, if you look at the U.S. alone, we're looking at the high 30,000s in terms of annual casualties. That could largely be mitigated. That number could be reduced dramatically by the introduction of this technology on a wide scale.
Well, so NXP operates globally, and this is a global plugfest. I mean, give me perspective, like how different is some of this, regulatory uncertainty you're seeing in the U.S. Are you seeing other countries taking a leadership position and providing that regulatory certainty that that the industry and the government?
We've seen some great collaboration between industry and government in places such as Singapore, Japan, Korea, Austria, Germany. In fact, many of you probably know that the new Golf 8 is being deployed series-wide with DSRC technology. So the build-out's there. The roadside infrastructure, in many cases, already exists. It's some hesitation on the part of the OEMs to commit, though, to a landscape that might not make sense, at least in the US, if we see certain unfortunate trends continue to develop on a regulatory basis.
Well, so, we've talked a little bit about regulation and the FCC, but what about Congress? What are you seeing, percolating on Capitol Hill? I know it's a challenging time in Washington in many ways, because there seems to be, we talk about gridlock, but there seems to be a heightened state of that here in Washington. But maybe, give us some insights as to what legislation is out there on the horizon that, potentially could help, whether it's funding, whether it's AV legislation, or legislation on spectrum. Give us your perspective.
There are a great number of things in the mix right now. There is AV legislation, which unfortunately has stalled year over year, not to use an automotive term, but it has stalled. We're getting closer and closer to seeing something materialize that I think really would give the boost to the industry. So that's helpful. There's also a combined package consisting of the so-called Chips for America Act and American Foundries Act, which cobbled into what's known as an amendment and what will likely be tacked onto a must-pass defense authorization package in the U.S., would provide for substantial subsidy-type funding. I say that broadly speaking for the semiconductor industry. And that alone may create the impetus for additional R&D initiatives that could kickstart new technologies that we can't even begin to conceive of yet, but which flow from where we stand today in terms of automotive technologies.
So, one of our sessions last night was focused on C-V2X and V2X deployment and testing in Korea and China. And we know that there's a little bit of competition across that Pacific Ocean between the U.S. and China in particular. I mean, can you talk about what you're seeing in this global race for connectivity and automation? Is the U.S. a little bit behind? Are there things we can do to catch up?
No, I don't think the U.S. is per se behind. There have been in the past initiatives that fostered these technologies. Probably the biggest and best known of these was the Smart City Challenge, which let's call it matured in 2016 and led to a substantial financial windfall for the city of Columbus. Not only did Columbus profit from being able to roll out technologies funded by the U.S. Department of Transportation, but various key technology players, including my company, NXP, contributed core technologies to creating a showcase in Columbus. It's just that, as I said, there are competing interests vying for available spectrum. And I think globally, that is the limiting factor. But as we move into new technologies, as we move into 5G and what comes beyond that, I think all of these things become interwoven. You know, we look at the number of connected devices globally, it's just a staggering number of devices. Cars are only one part of that, but cars are a critical part of that because of the key role that they play in our lives. And it's not just passenger vehicles, I'm talking commercial vehicles, freight, all of these things. If you think of the efficiencies that can be achieved, the cost savings in addition to safety, it's something that I think governments across the world are committed to.
That's fantastic. Well, so we're going to wrap up here in a second, but give me your view, maybe 10 years down the road. Will we see ubiquitous deployment of these connected and automated technologies, especially the connected piece?
It would be lovely if we did. I have 5 kids ranging in age from 19 all the way down to a 2-year-old. I was hoping by this point in time that my 19-year-old would be driving in an exceptionally safe, cocooned vehicle, courtesy of technology. We're not there yet. Maybe by the time my 2-year-old is driving. But along the way, there has been a commitment on the part of auto OEMs in the US, as you may have heard, to deploy 5 million radios over the next 5 years of both technologies. By that, I mean CVTX as well as DSRC. That is largely contingent upon the spectrum being available. But I think we'll get there slowly but surely. But it requires a commitment from everybody involved in the ecosystem. That includes, yeah.
That includes many here, and there are ways to get involved and ways to get that message out. Well, I wish we could have had more time. We could talk all day, but this has been a fantastic conversation. Peter, thank you so much. Please extend our appreciation to Lars.
Thanks to the audience too. As you probably all know, NXP was planning on hosting the plugfest in Austin, so we're grateful for everyone's contributions. Jason, for your organization, for everybody who's supporting it, from governments, across the world and in the US and at whatever level it might be. And thanks to the audience for making this what it is. Appreciate it.
That's great. Peter, thank you so much. Have a wonderful day.